evening, everyone, and welcome to the September 25th, 2013 meeting of the North Idaho College Board of Trustees. Would you all join us, please, in rising and giving the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a verification of a quorum. All of the trustees are present. And I do have a guest to introduce tonight, Tim Gerlitz, who is a new member of the North Idaho College family. He is the director of the Center for Educational Access. Tim, welcome. Thank you very much for attending and saying hello this evening. Thank you. Next, we have the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to read and review the minutes? And if so, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have no public comment signed up for this evening, so we'll move right on to celebrating success, and we have Bill Jung with the Small Business Development Center. Bill, thank you very much for coming this evening and bringing this story to us. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and member of the board. Thank you for a chance to share with you what we're doing. Can I begin by telling you a couple of stories? Is that okay?
Please.
So about 5 years ago, we had a call from a banker and up in Sandpoint, and she said, there is this little brewery that's been in business for 7 years, and I'm afraid it's going to go out of business. Is there anything you can do to help? So we connected with them and began to try to figure out what they're up to, and so this couple had invested all their savings, all their retirement, and they've been losing money for 7 years, and no bank would touch them. So we began to engage, and the first year we helped to reduce their cost of goods over 60%, improve their profit over 90%, and they were profitable. And then they got better, and they got better, and now their product is found all over the United States. And they export to Canada. And they're now the second largest brewery in the state of Idaho. Okay, and I'm sure many of you recognize the name if I mentioned it, but the second story is about 3 years ago, we had an aerospace company come and see us. They're struggling. They were struggling with quality, meeting deadline, cash flow, leadership issues, turnover with employees, and so they asked for help. And so we began to engage, and they learned fast. And the good news is, so one of the things we discovered in their financials, they've been around over 60 years, and for decades they've been surviving on virtually zero profit. 0 to 2%. So they had no capital to reinvest. So struggling with cash flow and that kind of stuff. Well, that was in 2011. In 2012, one of the owners called me in December and said, Bill, we're in trouble. And I said, we've been meeting every month, so this was a bit of a surprise. I said, what's going on? And she said, we have to pay taxes. We haven't had to pay taxes for decades. I said, that's a great problem. So in 2011, they made 12.5% income, net profit. And this year, they're on pace to make 18% for a manufacturing company, which is pretty extraordinary. So that's kind of what we do. One of the things we learned through the recession, I mean, many businesses struggled through the recession. We read a lot about it. But then we also have businesses that didn't struggle. And one of the things we learned through the recession is that the reason why businesses actually struggled was because they are actually average. They didn't struggle because of the recession. They struggled because they were average. And as consumers, we made a choice not to accept average. We want a better return for our money. Does that make sense? So one of the things we discovered, many businesses are average, and average businesses struggle with cash flow and many things. So we have many businesses come to us for cash flow, sales, employee issues, capital and those kind of things. And what we find is those are fairly common for average businesses. So what we do is we help average businesses become extraordinary. And then those problems kind of go away. And so we have businesses, clients, that did well all through the 5 years of the economic downturn. As a matter of fact, if you looked at some of their financial, you would never know that there was a recession. So what we do is we take businesses that are struggling and help them become extraordinary. So our mission is to actually help businesses thrive. That's why we exist, and because thriving businesses create jobs, and people with jobs can support families, and young people can have career opportunities, and then our community is prosperous and can thrive, and as a part of Idaho, then that's Idaho benefits, and as a part of this country, our country benefits. So that's our role in helping to facilitate a thriving, prosperous, wealthy community. So that's what we do. Now the question is, then how do we do that? Pretty simple: coaching and training. I have 5 retired executives who give their part-time and are volunteers, and we invest in leadership, working with businesses to help them get to the next level. So our primary offering is coaching, and then because our coaching hours are pretty scarce, we leverage training. And that's what we do to help businesses go from being a struggling business to a thriving business. So we're funded by the state, about 27%, and by SBA, about 43%, and then obviously balanced by the college. And we are part of the professional technical division with Mike Myers, and so we're under his umbrella, and that's kind of how we fit in at the college. So in the question, question may be, okay, are we any good? Are we doing any good? What's our impact? So in 2012, we helped to create and save 303 jobs. So about 267 jobs created and balance saved. And we helped our clients increase their sales about $14 million. And I would say those are kind of underreported because we only capture what our clients come back and say, Bill, this is what we did. We don't go out and actually rigorously survey all of our clients. The other thing that we're working on is one of the other things that we learned about from the recession in terms of what we do is we feel like North Idaho has a fairly weak economic model. What I mean by that is that we don't have enough economic activity within our border to support all the people and all the businesses. So we need outside capital. And when recession came and tourism went down and construction went down, obviously that really hurt us. So one of the things we feel like we need to build a stronger economic engine. And so here's our part of the vision in really doing that. So what we're working on is taking businesses that are local and make them really extraordinary. And if they're extraordinary, they can go regional. And if they do really well regionally, we want to take them national. And if they do really well, we want to take them global. So we want to take businesses that are local, we want to take them regional, national, and global. So that we have more businesses that are regional, national, global businesses that's headquartered in North Idaho, creating different kind of jobs. The hourly jobs, professional jobs, career jobs, management jobs. So, giving people career opportunities. So let me tell you a couple of stories about that. We had a billing company, medical billing, which is very competitive, very tough industry. They live off 6% of what they collect. So very, very tough industry. They've been around for a while. And so they came in and they were struggling and said, we need some help. So that was 4 years ago. Now, 4 years later, they are a technology solution provider to clinics, hospitals, surgery centers, and they have clients across 3 time zones. And they are thriving, high margin, creating lots of jobs. So that's one story. Another story, we have a company in Hayden that made cutting tools for floors and siding. And it was a tiny little company in Hayden, and now years later, it's a global business. 50% of their sales is overseas. And the president of the company was a former student body president at North Idaho College about 12 years ago. So we have lots of NIC students that are doing really well as entrepreneurs. Another story, this is about 2010, we had another aerospace company came to us, and the recession really hurt them. They had a lot of layoffs, struggling with delivery, quality, management, and all of that. And so we began to work with them, and in 2010 they did about 5.8 million in sales, but they made some really good strides. In 2012 they did 8.5, and this year they're going to do about 10 million, and their employment has doubled. They're almost 200 employees this year. In the last 3 years they've doubled their employment. So one of the things that we're working on, can I share this data? I gave you a little handout there, the orange color. And one of the stats that we learned from U.S. Department of Commerce is that 96% of world population is outside the U.S. That makes sense, right? 67% of purchasing power is outside the U.S. That also makes sense. But then there's maybe an opportunity there. And then 87% of global growth is expected to grow outside of the United States in the next 20 years. So greater opportunity. So Africa, middle class in Africa is growing, you got India's booming, Brazil's growing, a lot of countries growing a market opportunity. Somebody is going after those markets. But in here, less than 1% of businesses export. And majority of those companies export to one market. And most of it by default. Because somebody says, hey, you got a great product, can I buy some? So it's by default rather than intention. So what we want to do is we want to grow more global businesses that are headquartered in North Idaho. So as of this month, so you may not be aware, as of this month, we are an international trade center. We have an international trade center at North Idaho College. And we're helping businesses export. And so we have a coach that's an expert in exporting, actively working with clients, and many business you recognize, and trying to grow that. The other thing that we're working on is we want to get more Idaho technology to the market. Did you know that there's a company in North Idaho that makes these wheelchair? That's like wheelchair on steroids, ATV. It can rise up 6 feet, go over grass, rocks. I mean, it's a phenomenal product. We also have a company that makes conversion kits for motorcycles. So you can actually take the motorcycle on snow, up mountains, between trees, with more mobility and flexibility than snowmobiles. And they're the market leader located in North Idaho. So we want to get more technology companies, not only to the market, but growing and capturing market share. So that's what we're doing, because we want to create jobs, career opportunities, and create a obviously thriving community. And that's our small part in how North Idaho College serves our community. Do you have any questions?
Bill, thank you very much for that insight into the small business program. Ron?
Just a comment, Bill, as I've been blessed to get to know you. I've attended a couple of your events there and heard you speak, and we're one of the fortunate companies that does a lot of what you do, which is 75% of our business leaves the country. But what impressed me the most about your approach was your positive approach, very calm, the way that you presented. You went back to the basics of block and tackle, the fundamentals of your business, which a lot of people get in front of, and that you taught people how to work with the tools that they already have, using an old cliche of iron sharpen iron, that you saw the iron there and you just showed them how to just put a little bit better edge on that. So we're very blessed to have you in our community and the work that you do. So
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bill, I've also enjoyed listening to you speak. I think the last time I heard you was at the Upbeat Breakfast, and you did a great job there.
Thank you.
Just a couple questions for my edification.
Sure.
Going back to your funding sources, now, I believe you were 27%, 43%, and 30% approximately,
Mm-hmm.
and the SBA was the 43%,
That's correct.
and then the 27 government, was that federal or state?
That's the state.
Okay.
27, state of Idaho.
Okay. Department of Commerce, Department of Labor?
Uh, um, uh, um,
That's okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I know the word, but it's not coming to my mind.
We've all had that.
It's not commerce, it's education? I need to check on this. I apologize.
No worries. I have two follow-up questions.
Yes.
One was you were talking about the lack of internal capital and how we need the external capital to come in and how we're unable to sustain. Have you, in your looking at this, come to the conclusion that we need to do a better job within this community to get people to buy within this community? In other words, are we properly marketing to ourselves within, say, the Kootenai County extended area versus people reaching out to Spokane or Montana or Seattle or wherever to buy stuff? Or are we utilizing those opportunities, or are we just so lacking we can't get there internally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say there's obviously, people are seeking out great experiences. So they're going to go to places where they perceive it has a better experience, better product, better service. And fundamentally, I believe if we help businesses become extraordinary, they will stand out. So we want to have more businesses in North Idaho become extraordinary, and people will choose to spend the money here than in Spokane or Seattle or anywhere else. So really, I would say that's kind of addressing, we want to make our businesses really, really strong so that they are exceptional here. And then if they're exceptional here, then obviously they can draw from outside. So instead of us going to Spokane, we'll have Spokane coming to.
That would be a nice change of
Idaho.
pace. It doesn't seem to happen a lot. We have a tendency to go that way, but they don't really
Right.
come this way. One more question, if I may, sir. And don't take this question wrong, because it could be perceived as taking a shot at you, and I'm not trying to at all. When you do this service for these companies, the coaching or the evaluations and that sort of thing, are we charging for that, or is that a free service?
It's at no cost to the businesses.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Under the umbrella of the college and the primary mission of education, and obviously we're subsidizing you at 30%, tell me how we integrate that as an educational function. Because, I mean, I see us doing a community service, so maybe that just comes under the auspices of community college. I see what you're doing, but that's almost like a chamber function or a Jobs Plus function or so I'm trying to understand how we ended up with you here at the college, I guess. It's an
Yes.
interesting concept to me.
So, that's a really good question. I mean, that maybe the board can maybe even give me some insight, because obviously I've been here going on 8 years. I would say three things that I think that really connects with the college. I would say number one, we create jobs and opportunities for young people. Number two, everything we do, for every dollar that is spent at the SBDC, we generate anywhere between, depending on the report, $49 to $17 in added tax revenue. And that's just the first year. And so it generates tax revenue. And so our part, when you're talking about 300 jobs a year, obviously that's not a small change. That has an economic impact year after year in North Idaho that creates a thriving community.
So if I get them to buy houses, that increases my tax base, so maybe I get a few more dollars off the property taxes for the college.
That could be a connection. Yep. Yes.
Because, I mean, the sales tax and the income tax, we don't, well, maybe
Yes.
if the state has more money, maybe we'll actually get some for education.
And the other thing I would say, another thing that I think we are probably one of the best PR to the business community for NIC, because we create lots of goodwill to the local business community.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Bill, I too have
you.
seen you speak before, and it's been a real pleasure. And I know that you have brought national accolades to the college, and so thank you for that. To answer a little bit for Mr. Banducci, that's a philosophical direction by the board to invest in your program. And it's obviously been working very well in our community and for the college. And you know, when I think about these businesses that come to you struggling, and your team turns them around like that, that's pretty inspirational. I'm a public employee. I don't put everything on the line like my fellow board members who are business people. I think I work hard, but I don't put, every day I don't have to put everything on the line like they do, and you've helped a tremendous amount of businesses come out of some really tough times, and that does a lot for this community and for the college, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Judy?
As we think about our discussion here and the fact that this is shared with the community, if folks heard this and said, oh, I'd like to learn more about it, how does that happen?
Well, they can call us, 665-5085.
And your title, the center is called?
Idaho Small Business Development Center.
So
And
it's
we are
in-
co-located with the Workforce Training Center in Post Falls. That's where our office is. Or they can email ispdc@nic.edu. ispdc@nic.edu.
Bill, can you say your phone number again, please?
665-5085.
You're out at the...
And to follow up on that, then, can anybody come talk to you, and then those small business can decide if it's the right match, that nobody has any expectations beyond a chance to explore the services that we provide might be useful to them?
Yes, I would say we are probably the primary resource for businesses in North Idaho, so if they have any questions. So whether it's a startup, to be candid, 75% of our work is with existing businesses, because that's where the pain is and the need is, and then 25% with startups, but we try to assist anybody that come our way, yes.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just elaborate a little bit more about the question, what does the small business development piece have to do with the education? And I would suggest three things. First of all, our mission and vision statements reflect that we serve our communities and are involved in community engagement. Second of all, workforce development and economic development are primary functions of every community college in the country. And then lastly, what Bill does for those companies is provide an educational service. It's an education process to bring those companies to a new level of performance.
Thank you for that clarification, yes.
And I appreciate your answers. And I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. That's why I wasn't trying to take a shot. And it's probably good that President Dunlap elaborated. But I'm thinking somebody's going to be watching this tape, and you're going to have said all that, and then somebody's going to walk up to me and go, why are we doing that, and what are we doing? And so I'd like to be prepared with an answer or an understanding.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. That helped me out a lot.
Any other questions for Bill? Bill, before you sit down, I wanted to ask you, you said that you're now an international trade center. And so I was looking at your title, and it would be NIC, Small Business International Trade and Development Center. You realize that's going to make a terrible acronym.
And also tech commercialization.
Oh, I
You had that, yeah. We're gonna roll lots. This is part of our goal. Vision is to really impact 500 jobs a year. That's kind of as a team. That's where we're going. If we feel like if we can impact 500 jobs a year, that really is going to have a significant impact in our economic engine and economic pie. And so we are rolling in things that make sense, that allows us to get to that scale. When I started here 8 years ago, I think first year was 27 job impact. So we've now got to 303, and hopefully in the next number of years we can get to the 500. So
Well, congratulations on your success, and congratulations on the success you brought to our community. Thank you very much. Our next area on the agenda is special reports, and I want to make a comment. From time to time, the trustees have asked for special reports, and we request these reports so that we can keep up to date on information that we need in making decisions and setting policy. They are general reports that will give us information that help us as we reach decisions in budgeting and programming and setting policy. Tonight we have two. One's a report from K-Tech, and Tim Fortune is going to give us that report. And then following that, we have a regional economic outlook with Grant Forsyth. So, Tim? thank you very much for coming down here and giving us an update on K-Tech.
Good evening, and thanks for having me in tonight. So I've been with K-Tech since the startup. I started as their program startup for welding and made the transition to executive director last June. As most of you know, K-Tech is in its second year. We're currently offering eight programs with a new addition of Media and Communications program at Venture High School in Coeur d'Alene. We are running approximately 330 students, which was roughly the same as what we ended with last year. We are very proud of our partnership with NIC. We've seem to have partnered very well with NIC, currently offering articulation credits, tech prep credits in the neighborhood across all the program areas of about, I think, 30 to 35 credits, with more increasing this year. We are also looking forward to this year, particularly because we will graduate our first 2-year program completers. So it's interesting that I'm following up with Bill, because we are also somewhat of an economic impact tool. So what we're doing is we are filling the skills gap that's currently out there. Manufacturing skills gap, there's a skills gap in various trades. We have industries in and out of our halls almost on a daily basis, and it's our aim to not stop when a student leaves our doors, and to successfully place them. So as they graduate, and we look at those 2-year completers that we're having this year, we're shooting for as close to 100% placement as we possibly can. All of our programs in our PTS, we're the only PTS in Northern Idaho, are based on industry standard certifications, and every student has a opportunity to get to those industry standard certifications before they even hit post-secondary. So it's an incredible opportunity, one that I wish that I had when I was starting in trades as a welder. So I'm an early retiree out of the welding trade. Came to education about 10 years ago, did 3 program startups, and again, I'm delighted to be with K-Tech. We are also working this year, and have had a number of people who've walked through the hallways this year remark on the renewed focus that K-Tech has within the hallways, and the professionalism that we're trying to ingrain in the culture of K-Tech. Had a number of industry people remark that it is a more focused entity this year. I'm very happy to hear it, and we continue to seek industry's guidance, partner with NIC, and continue to improve. So I'm excited about this year and beyond. So thank you.
Bill,
Any questions?
Yes, Tim, thank you. Board have any questions of Tim? Well, I have a question, I guess, while they're thinking about it, because they always come up with questions. You said there were about 330 students this year. Can you give us an estimate of the breakdown of the students in terms of the skill? You got some in healthcare, you got some in, I suspect, welding and those other skills. Can you break it down for us?
It's fairly even. All the classes are running currently at capacity. Traditionally, you'll see this most likely or mostly at most community colleges. You're going to be heavy in your enrollment in welding, heavy in enrollment in programs like diesel, and that's reflective of K-Tech as well. But as a whole, they're basically fairly even enrollment-wise on all the programs.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Ron.
I've been very fortunate to work with Tim, And the part that I admire the most about him, and he not only has a story, he tells a story. And these kids that are enrolled in there always want to know where they're going to go. And his story is I didn't know where I was going, didn't have the money to get the education, so I got a job and learned a skill so I could be able to afford to be able to support my family and to continue my education. So he goes on and gets a couple of master's degrees, takes that and starts teaching and becomes a leader in the field that he grew up at, that paid his way all the way through school. So when people talk about the professional technical or the CTE, the career and technical education arena, they assume that that means they surrendered and they gave up on their continued education. And I think that Tim's an example, like what we have to get, we hope to see happen there all the time, which is that that's a completion of a one skill with certificate, and that they find out that a higher percentage of these kids that go on to post-education will continue on with a degree when they get this certificate. So I love to hear a story, because it's a pretty humbling story how he got from where he is to stand before us today. And he's I suggest you get to know him. He truly cares about those kids individually, each one at a time. So
Thank you. Todd?
Doing a great job, Tim, out there.
Thanks.
Had the opportunity to see that facility, which leads me to two questions, if I may. You had mentioned that the current enrollment was approximately 330, and that's about where you guys finished off last year. And then you mentioned that your classes fairly evenly distributed and pretty full, it sounded like. Now, what's your capacity? How close are you to capacity, or are you at a point where if you get many more students, you have to bring on another instructor, add another shift or class or something?
Last year, we ran a third session, a late night shift. We're not currently running that.
Okay.
We are in the process of refocusing a carpentry program that's hopefully going to be online again in second semester. So when we bring that back on, we will be at capacity, and we are pretty close to being outgrown the building, actually.
One more question, if I may, sir. Of the 330, approximately how many of those are projected to graduate this year, in the spring?
We have a roughly, half and half breakdown of juniors and seniors, so roughly half.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christie?
You knew I'd come up with something.
Sure.
Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
for speaking. I could probably ask Ron some of this, but you're on the spot.
Okay.
So your board of directors is Ron, Jerry Keene, help me with this.
Superintendent of schools, so it's.
Yeah, the three superintendents, Matt, Jerry, Ron.
Mary Ann Rennell.
Mary Ann, okay. So I understand that board and their duties because they're similar to us, but I think you said you have an advisory board that looks at programs from the business industry?
So every PTE, CTE program are required, and even if they weren't required, they would want to have an advisory board to determine curriculum, determine trends in industry, help guide and mold those programs. So every program has an industry-led advisory board that they meet with at least biannually to help them with those curriculum decisions, help with guest speakers, help with tours, help with equipment, and keep them abreast of current industry trends.
Okay, and so how do you determine future programs? I don't know, is the process with your board, Ron, or with your advisory boards? And then the second question is, we've talked about our partnership with NIC, and I'm so glad to hear you say that so much. But I'm wondering, how are we integrating as well, so that if you look at articulation, how are we matching up with the programs at K-Tech?
Well, every program at K-Tech has a supportive program at NIC. As far as new programming, from my point of view, I just have to look at what's going on and what's starting to emerge in the field. You can look to NIC and you see the aerospace starting up. That's going to be in the forefront. As K-Tech grows, I would imagine that it would grow that direction. It's not been a discussion yet, but it seems to be a natural a growth pattern, as a similar program that started up in a new similar college in Spokane Valley, aerospace. So you look at industry trends, seek guidance from the board and advisory committees when talking about those, program additions.
Great. Thank you.
Any other
Yes.
questions? Tim, I have another one, if I might. You indicated that you're hoping to have 100% placement of your graduates. And I would expect that some of that is going to be into further education and some of it's going to be in employment.
Correct.
And that's the kind of placement you're talking about, right?
When we talk about placement, we're talking about straight to the workforce, to post-secondary education, NIC, or the military. That's our three placement options that we count on that positive placement data.
And how do you track that? How do you determine that, those numbers?
This year, as part of my goal, is we're starting that job placement process probably mid-year, and my goal as the administrator is to try to place those students with businesses before they even are out the door of K-Tech. So minimal tracking needs to be done. We have, they're in our database, and they can self-report as much or as as little as they want to, but I can track that a lot better if I can place them right out of the gate, and that's what I'm hoping to do this time.
Well, one of the reasons I'm asking the question is you can imagine NIC is expecting that there will be some that will move on to NIC, and we're trying to get a sense of the trends that might be set in that way. And so I was wondering if we're collecting data that would help us in that analysis, and if so, how is it available? Would it be available to us?
And I will make that data should be pretty firm around mid-year, and I can share that data with you, so you'll know what data or what students will be coming in IC, what's going to the workforce, and we should have pretty firm numbers around then. Students have to make those choices, as far as an IC and enrollment, so that data is pretty easy to come by, at least by mid-year.
Do you have that data from last year?
We have bits and pieces of it. With the transition that we went through last year, it's not, I was, of course, in the welding program. It's not as solid as I would have liked it, and we'll have much more solid data this year.
Great. Ron, you had a question?
Yeah, just to come alongside Tim, is that this advisory board there are all active leaders in the fields that's there, and it's when the K-Tech come together, the money that was raised was from the private sector, which is unusual, and that the support of just got a new plasma burner where the community came together and delivered this thing free and clear to the institution because they saw that it was needed. One of the unique things about that is they have the Department of Labor has an office there, so these kids don't have to leave the campus to go talk about job placement and opportunities there, and that a lot of people will work with them. So they got some unusual setup there with the relationship with the business owners. I go down there all the time, and there's always CEOs and businesses there in the classroom, some coming and speaking and whatever, so it's a unique environment for these kids. So.
Yeah, just touched on that, I've been in and out of skills centers in Washington for the better part of 10 years, and what I see at K-Tech is unprecedented industry support that I've never seen at an educational institution. So it's incredible.
Any other questions? Tim, again, thank you very much for coming down and sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Our next report is from Grant Forsyth. Grant comes to us, he's the chief economist for Avista Corporation, and Avista has been very gracious in allowing him to come in and give us some insight into the some of the economic forecast information for our area. Grant, thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you very much. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was actually a faculty member at Eastern Washington University for 13 years as an economics professor, and I've been with Avista now for just about a year and a half. Now, I was given a little bit of direction here from Shannon about what I should cover, and so what I'm going to focus on here is some very good data that's now coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics about occupational pay and occupational opportunities for specific geographic regions. And in particular, what we're going to look at is what's called Occupational Employment Statistics, OES data. And again, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the group that brings you the unemployment rate and non-farm employment that Wall Street follows so closely. And we're going to also be looking at their occupational projections for the U.S. Out to 2020. And so what this is a very detailed survey of employment by occupational category using what they call standard occupational categories. And they have broad categories, and underneath these broad categories, they narrow it down to very specific occupational categories. It's a very detailed survey that provides a lot of information about employment levels and pay. Okay? Now, the great thing is historically you could only get this for metropolitan statistical areas, so for Spokane or Kootenai, but now you can not only get it for MSAs, and they do this survey every year, so the data I'm going to show you is for 2012, so it's very recent. It also now has a survey for what they call the North Idaho rural or non-MSA area, and that includes Benoit, Bonner, Boundary, Clearwater, Idaho, Latah, Lewis, and Shoshone. And so those, in other words, Kootenai is not in that non-MSA area. And so you get a way of looking at what's happening in your main urban area, but you also get a very good look at what's happening in your more rural areas. Right? So it's very comprehensive in that sense. And that's a relatively new addition. Okay? And then we'll look at some projections for the U.S. In particular, I want to look at some specific occupational categories that you're designing programs for here based on your strategic plan. So we'll talk about those in just a second. And so how are OES wages defined? So we're going to spend a little time talking about wages because that's an important component when you think about, what are you training people for and what is the pay they're going to get. And it's a pretty standard definition. It includes what they call the base rate of pay, cost of living allowances, guaranteed pay, hazardous duty pay, and incentive pay and tips. Okay? That's what goes into their definition of wages. What it excludes is everything that you see there, and that's some special, very specialized kinds of income, and so they're really focusing on what we would consider core wages. Now, I hate to sound like a university professor, but I want to make sure everybody's clear on some terms because I'm going to be using them with great abandon here, and so it's probably useful to talk about definitions. These occupational wage estimates are either estimates of mean, the average, or percentiles, such as the median wage. Okay? Now remember, the median is important when we look at wages. It tends to be what economists focus on because with wages, the mean or the average can be very skewed in favor of a few very highly paid people. It's like if Bill Gates walked into this room and we calculate average pay, right? And then Bill Gates leaves the room and we calculate average pay, there's going to be a big change there. So we tend to focus on what's called the median, and that means 50% of people or occupations are less than that number and 50% are above. And it's a better measure of typical pay. It's the median, or sometimes called the 50th percentile. Okay? And so what we're going to be focusing on here is really percentiles with a real emphasis on the median. And just for reference, I know that the board has a copy of this presentation. If anybody wants this presentation, they can contact Shannon. There's nothing secret here, or you can contact me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Okay, so here we've got a blue line and a red line. Okay, the blue line is basically the distribution of wages across all occupations by percentile. Okay, and I'll explain a little more detail here pretty soon. The red line is for the more rural areas of North Idaho with the counties we just described just a minute ago. Okay, and so in the boxes there we see what's called the median pay. So 50% of people are in occupations that earn more than that, and 50% are in occupations that earn less than that. So for Kootenai, The median is about $29,000 a year, and for the rural areas of North Idaho, it's just over $28,000. So very similar, actually, right? Now you can see there I have other percentiles, and so if you go all the way to what's called the 90th percentile, what that means is people earning that pay, that means 90% of people are earning less than that. Okay? If you go down to the 10th percentile, that means only 10% of the people are earning less than that. Okay? And so the 90th percentile tends to be where you have higher pay, meaning 90% of the people earn less. Okay? Now, what's interesting about the wage profile here in the region is there's really not a big difference between urban and rural, and that's not always the case. And so that black line there really represents the spread between those two lines at each percentile level. And really, until you get to the 90th percentile, there's not a big difference in annual pay between urban and rural areas. And I just want to point out that's interesting because that's not always the case. Okay? That's not always the case. Oftentimes, you can see very big wage differentials between urban and rural, but we don't really see that here until you get to really the higher paid occupations. And now let me stop. Any questions? That's a leftover from my professor days. I can't help myself. Okay.
Talk in your hands.
So now, just by comparison, this dotted line here, I didn't put any numbers in here, but the dotted line is the percentile distribution for the U.S. Okay? And what you can see is at the lower paid areas, the 10th and 25th percentile, we look like a lot like the U.S., but as we get to the 50th, 75th, and 90th, there gets to be a bigger spread between what we see in the U.S. as a whole and what we see in the region. And that's not atypical. We see the same thing for Spokane County. Right? So compared to the U.S., the inland Northwest tends to have overall lower pay than what you see for the U.S. average. Okay? Not unusual. Okay? Not unusual. Now, what I want to talk about, and I apologize for the size of the font. I was trying to get all of this squeezed in here. These are the broad occupational categories. Okay? So we have, at the top there you can see farming, fishing, and forestry. Then we have legal, you have life, physical, and social science occupations. So these are broad occupational categories. Okay? The blue is Kootenai, the red is North Idaho, the rural areas. Okay? And what I'm showing here is the percentage of employment that falls in those occupational categories. And so if you summed up all the red lines, it would be 100%, meaning 100% employment in the rural areas. Summed up the blue, it would be 100% for Kootenai, for each one of those occupational categories. You can see it looks very similar, but there are some differences. Okay? You do observe some differences. In particular, if you look at education, training, and library, it's much higher in rural areas. One of the reasons for that is in rural areas, it's the same in Washington State, the dominant employer is the educational system in a lot of rural areas. It's the single largest employer typically for a lot of rural counties. It's the K through 12. Okay? You can also see if you go to the very bottom there of office administration and support, it's relatively high here in Kootenai County, and again, that's going to be associated with a lot of professional business activities where you need that kind of support. Okay? So let me stop. Any questions about what you see here? It's very similar, but we do see a few things that stand out differently. Now you can see here that you can see that there's an awful lot of employment going on with office and administrative support, sales and related occupations, food preparation and serving related. So it turns out that a lot of people actually work in these occupations down below, as we're going to see, that actually don't necessarily make a lot of money. So a lot of occupations are in lower paid service types of work. And again, that's not all that unusual if you looked at any place in the United States.
Forsyth?
Yes, here.
Yes.
Dr. Forsyth,
Oh, sorry.
under the term production, is that another term for manufacturing?
Yeah, typically when you see production, that's going to be associated with some kind of manufacturing or goods production.
Thank you.
Yep. Now, I always like, my standard joke is, as an economist, I like to have a few graphs that only I can understand. Okay? And so that's what we have here. And again, I call this sort of the big picture again, looking at employment shares and the relation between the share of employment and the pay that goes along with that. And again, the blue is Kootenai, the red is the rural areas around Kootenai County. And what you can see here is each one of those dots represents one of those broad occupational categories I showed you in the previous slide. And so what I'm looking at is what is the median pay in that broad occupational category, and what is its share of employment in each one of these two different areas. And what you can observe here is the higher the pay, the lower the share of that occupation's contribution to total employment. Okay? All right, so let me give you an example here. So right here, we have this is the lowest paid broad occupational category. It's food preparation and serving, okay, and it's about 10% of employment in Kootenai County. Okay. Okay. What's interesting is if you look in the rural areas, it's about the same. Right? So it has probably one of the highest shares of employment, but it has one of the lowest pay ranges, in this case, median pay. Okay. This is what we call occupations, the broad occupation category called management occupations. Okay. It tends to almost always be the highest. Okay. Turns out it's the same for rural areas. Okay. In fact, interestingly enough, and this is a little bit unusual, is the management occupation for the rural areas is actually a little bit higher than what it is in Kootenai. Okay. And again, these would be the more professional managerial kinds of occupations that you might typically associate with a 4-year bachelor's degree. Okay. This is office administration and support. Again, that's a major employer, but it turns out it's also a major employer in rural areas as well. So again, a lot of similarity here. Now, if you were to look at pay, if you look at 30,000 or less, it turns out about 2/3 of occupational employment is in the $30,000 or less per year category. So roughly 2/3 of the people living in both rural areas and the urban Kootenai area, about 2/3 of those folks are making less than $30,000 a year. And again, that's pretty typical for the region. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out too is there's a lot of excitement in our region about healthcare. One of the things you have to know about healthcare is pay in the healthcare industry is very bifurcated. Okay? So in particular, this is healthcare practitioners. This would be doctors, dentists, nurse practitioners, registered nurses. So again, people who have more of a 4-year type of education or more to work in the healthcare industry. And again, we see the same thing. It's the pay for this is lower in rural areas, and again, that's not too unusual versus the pay you could earn in an urban area. But this is not the only healthcare category. We have another one called healthcare support. These are the more less than 4-year degree kinds of things. These are nurses' assistants, doctors' assistants, office assistants, that kind of thing that work in healthcare. And so one of the things we have to think about when we think about healthcare pay is that it's actually very bifurcated. Okay? And so you can see really a pretty big difference, and it's the same for rural areas as well. And so I know that, Eastern, Gonzaga, a lot of universities are very excited about developing programs to train people for healthcare. Just keep in mind that there's two very different kinds of job categories in healthcare, and the pay is quite different. Okay? And so as you begin to build up the ability to train people for healthcare, you just need to be aware of that so you know, what are we really training people for and what are the wages associated with that. Stop. Questions about that? All right. So let's talk about some projections here. Now, these are occupational categories, and they don't show up quite as well as I had hoped. These are projections for the U.S. done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay? And I've ranked, the gold area is ranked by the amount of projected growth. Okay? This is projected annual job growth. So, each year, what can we expect? The projection was originally started in 2010, goes out to 2020. And so for all occupations in the U.S., and this would be basically employment in general, they expect employment to grow about 1.4% a year in the U.S. in terms of occupational employment. Okay, now, the second column that you see there, I put this up because I think this is really interesting. They can estimate, from their survey, they can tell in a given occupation what percentage of people are self-employed. Now, this is important information to know because when you think about training people for the labor force, one of the things you might want to think about in your training programs is how well are these people prepared to be basically miniature firms, to be self-contractors or self-employed, and do they know how to do that? Right? So it's something to think about when you're thinking about your training programs, as you begin to think about, okay, what programs we want. If there's a high tendency to be self-employed, maybe your program needs to include some business-related issues about being in that situation. Okay? So something to think about. So each one of these topics in the gold area here are areas that from your strategic plan you're interested in. And so in other words, I looked at your strategic plan and I tried to match the occupational category from the SOC to what's in your strategic plan. So in your strategic plan, you have automotive technology, diesel technology, outdoor power, recreational vehicle technology, and collision repair technology. It goes on welding, machine and CNC technology, maintenance mechanic millwright, and potentially computer-aided design technology, mechanical, and then computer-aided design technology, architectural, carpentry, and HVAC. So if you look at each one of those categories in the gold there, I tried to match as closely as I could these occupational categories, again, with what's in your strategic plan. Now, you can see here that for some of these occupations are going to grow faster than what the overall growth rate for the U.S., right? And others are going to grow slower. So, for example, with millwrights, they actually expect some decline in that occupational category in the long run for the U.S. Okay? For architectural and civil drafters, probably somewhat flat. But what's interesting is the HVAC is by far the fastest growing category, right, by a long shot, followed by carpenters, and then you have computer-controlled machine tool operators and for metal and plastic as well. Okay? And so, but it just kind of gives you an idea as you set up your programs, what is the expected U.S. growth rate in these categories. And again, this is useful to know because if you're looking at programs where the projection shows large declines, maybe from a resource allocation point of view, you want to think about that again. Now, it may be the case that you have some specialized ways of placing people in some of these areas like millwrights where this wouldn't necessarily concern you, but you still maybe want to think about it if the data indicates large declines. Okay? Because again, scarce resources, you want to put programs where they have the greatest chance of employment. Let me stop. Any questions? Okay. Now, real quick here too, what I'm about to go through now is a series of graphs where I look at the wage profile in Kootenai, in the rural areas around Kootenai, and compared against the U.S. for each one of these occupational categories. So one thing you want to consider is what does it look like growth is going to be in these areas? The next you want to consider is what does pay look like? And now this is important because when you train people, you're basically giving them a set of very portable skills. They can go anywhere with these skills. Right? Now, I know that one of the goals for NIC is to try to train people to fill the needs of the local economy. But remember, you are training people with portable skills, and so if they can earn higher wages someplace else, there's going to be a big incentive to maybe go someplace else with those skills. And so, it's kind of useful to know, what is our wages relative to, say, what the U.S. is for these given occupational categories. And so what you see here is, again, the red line is for Kootenai. For the rural areas around Kootenai, the blue line is Kootenai, and the dotted line is the U.S. And so this is the percentile pay for these individual occupations. Okay? Now, in the case of architectural and civil drafters, they didn't have this category for rural North Idaho, so there was no way for me to put it in. But it's kind of interesting. So, for example, if you look at carpenters, in the 10th and 25th percentile, it's very similar to the U.S., but after that, carpentry pays considerably more outside of the region. Okay? If you look at automotive body and related repair, again, we look a lot like the U.S., okay, in that sense. Okay? And it's also interesting to note that within the region, there aren't necessarily big differences in pay for these occupational categories.
Do you find it, sorry,
Go ahead.
do you find it odd, especially in the automotive body and related repair, and then it starts out that way with carpenters, that the rural area is at a higher wage base?
Yeah, that is surprising to me. And again, I think if you looked at a lot of other areas, on urban areas surrounded by rural areas, I would be surprised if you saw that. And so I think in that respect, North Idaho is maybe perhaps a little bit different in that respect. And so I don't have a good explanation for that. Right? It's the same thing for management occupations, where you see in rural areas, you have a little bit higher pay in management occupations than you do in Kootenai. Now that may reflect a few specifically large employers that are based in rural areas that pay relatively high wages. So that's partly what that might reflect.
Let me ask you a question. So if you go back to automotive body and related repairs, that's one of the highest percentages of self-employment. So you get in a rural area, somebody decides to open up his own shop. Here he goes, meets with Bill Young. Bill talks him into starting his own business, and now he's doing it in a rural area. That income that is recorded for him under an LLC or a sub-S is full. So if he makes $150,000 and after expenses he makes $100,000, that records as there, which would move that number way out of line, right?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be that you have a lot of people in a self-employment context that are doing reasonably well. And remember, in some rural areas, you might not have a lot of competition. And so for certain occupations, you might have monopoly power that you can reflect in what you charge people. Oops. I think I'm missing a whole bunch of stuff. There's that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so sorry for that. This is, again, some various examples here. In each one of these cases, you know, for like bus truck mechanics, diesel engine specialists, you can actually see Kootenai and the U.S. line up pretty well, but it's definitely lower in the rural areas. Heating, the HVAC kind of professions, again, Kootenai compares relatively well with the rest of the U.S., but it is lower in rural areas. And then automotive service technicians and mechanics, again, almost lines up exactly on top of each other, all three areas. And again, you know, millwrights make a lot more money outside of the region, but for the other two up there, you see it's somewhat similar. So, you know, in some cases we compare pretty favorably with the rest of the U.S. In other areas, people with those skills can earn a lot more. And again, that's maybe something to know because, again, these days people have to be mobile to maximize their standard of living. And if they can earn a lot more money outside of the region, even though they've been trained here, there's a big incentive to move on if they can. Now, this is the last slide, so your misery's just about over here. I want to talk a little bit about what's been happening to wage growth, adjusted for inflation. Okay, and this is important. And so what I'm looking at here is, again, the horizontal axis there is median pay, and each one of those dots represents one of those broad occupational categories we started out with. Okay. The axis there, so in other words, the vertical axis there looks at what has been the total change in the median wage from 2009 to 2012. That's the kind of the bad economic time period. So even though it's post-recession, it's been a very slow recovery. So over this very slow recovery period, what's happened to median wage growth in those occupational categories adjusted for inflation? And what you can see is wage growth has not kept pace with inflation. So one of the challenges I think we're having in the U.S., and that's certainly going to be the case for the people you train here at NIC, is maybe the issue is not getting them placed. Maybe you can get them placed. But one of the challenges is once you get placed, how do you progress in your job to make sure that your wage actually keeps pace with the rate of inflation? And so what we're seeing here, at least in the middle, at the median, for a lot of occupations since the end of the recession, that has not occurred. Now what's interesting is the line is upward sloping. So the higher the paid job you have, okay, the more likely you were to keep pace, just keep pace with inflation, maybe gain a little bit more. But for the lower skilled jobs, there was a greater tendency not to keep pace with inflation. Okay? And so again here, one of the challenges here is how to teach people how not to get stuck in this trap. And I think this issue was discussed about the importance of continuing education after you finish your initial training. Because by getting that continuing education, you have a much greater likelihood of moving up in terms of the pay percentile, and it's that progression that's most likely going to get you those pay increases that keep you ahead of the rate of inflation. And of course, the problem is once you reach the top of your profession, you're kind of stuck. But early on, that continuing education is important, so you basically make those promotions that help you outpace the rate of inflation. And I think that's one of the things you probably need to counsel your students on as much as possible, that continuing education is important. Okay, and I think that is it. Thank you very much.
There might be some more questions. Ron?
When you discuss this grant and you exclude out things like retirement, healthcare, PTO, which are all huge variables between different industries, whatever, is there not some calculations that says that the full burden cost of a $20 an hour person that is in this industry in the private sector, maybe $20 an hour job in the public sector, there could be as much as $10 an hour difference when you start taking into your retirement programs and your health care coverage for you and your family and the PTO and bereavement pay and all that type of stuff. None of this is taken into account on this.
Yeah, and so let me use me as a personal example. Like all faculty members, I used to complain incessantly about my pay, okay, which is kind of what we do. We're good at it. But one of my colleagues pointed out to me is that, being in a government job like I was, I have unusually good healthcare benefits. And when you monetize those benefits, my pay is substantially higher than, say, somebody in the private sector earning similar pay who probably wouldn't have that good of benefits. And so that's true, right? And so this really just includes kind of money income pay, but not necessarily benefit differentials that would exist between public and private sector jobs. That's absolutely true. So we're just looking at basic money income pay.
But if somebody is 50 years old and he's making $40,000 a year and he's making standard 401k pay, and this one's getting 30% of his annual salary put into a retirement, and he's going to retire in 12 years, that money is going in. And so when you start looking at the true cost and the benefit, you have to find some way to calculate that in. They don't do that.
No. So yeah, exactly, because that becomes more complicated. So the BLS tends to focus more on the pure wage component. Now there are measures in the Bureau of Labor Statistics where they do track benefit costs. Okay? And you can get that data. It's not necessarily particularly regionalized data, so it's hard to look at it regionally, but they do track some measures of the total cost of employment. And then you can get a better sense of what's the wage cost versus what is the benefit cost.
Because that's interesting is that when you get into a discussion, we have 250 employees and we pay 100% of the health care. We have PTO days, we have vacation pays, we have retirement, we have 401k. And then somebody you hear that's going to be leaving and you hear why, well, he's going to make $1 more an hour someplace else. And then when you go talk to him, you say, well, what is your insurance program there? What's your, well, they don't have any of that. They just get so focused on that fixed number that instead of making we're paying him 18, right, he wants to make $19 an hour, and he will leave for $1 an hour.
Well, I think part of the educational process for the student is I talk about the issue of educating them about the issues surrounding self-employment. But I think part of the educational process too is making sure that when they're evaluating their opportunities in the job market, they make a apples to apples comparison about what they may be, giving up if they switch jobs. And so I think that should be part of the educational process is how do I evaluate job opportunities? Yeah, so it's a good point.
I agree.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
maybe a question
Christie?
for Joe. Joe, do we share this data with our students when they're looking at counseling opportunities and career opportunities, yeah.
We do share with the students the job market in terms of projected retirements and projected growth within a particular industry. But this information that Dr. Forsythe has provided to us is much more detailed than what we have access to and can provide to the students.
So we need to be referring them to your website.
Well, and unfortunately, it's publicly available information, but the BLS website, it's actually a great website if you're an economist, right? And so to access the data, you have to almost, you have to mess around in the data for a while or have somebody show you exactly where to go to pull it out.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to download it into Excel. It's a fairly large data set because under each one of these big occupational categories we were discussing, there are many, many subcategories.
Sure.
But it's a pretty good breakdown of what roughly you would earn, if you got into that area.
There is a company out of Moscow that produces this level of data that could be provided to students, but to subscribe to that program is about $25,000 per year. And we just took a look at that. They provide very good data, wage data, the growth and potential within a particular career field. But, $25,000 a year for that data is a healthy price tag.
Sure.
Well, and just so you know, this data is typically highly regarded. It's often used, this SOC survey data is frequently used in collective bargaining negotiations as a basis for determining pay. And so it's considered to be pretty good data, pretty reliable.
Ron?
Can you, I look under the bus and truck mechanic versus a diesel engine specialist, I mean, that could be as much as $8, $10 an hour difference, but they're lumped in the same category. Can
Right.
you get the diesel engine specialist and get the difference between a certified welder and a solderer, which is a $10 an hour difference?
Yeah.
Can you get that specifically to a skill set and certification?
I don't think so. And the reason why part of it is that for a lot of the smaller metropolitan areas or rural areas, to break it down that fine, you run the risk of maybe revealing, violating confidentiality agreements connected with the survey. The other problem is that maybe you don't it's connected to that. So if you break it down even finer, you may have very few people in those very finer and finer definitions of occupation. So I'm not sure you can break it down much more finely than what they're giving it to you, I suspect.
Todd?
Approximately how much time, Grant, did you devote to extracting this data and compiling it and organizing it? Just top level.
Top level, it probably took me, I would say, 2 working days, which is, so let's say, well, actually, let me divide that up. Probably the whole time to extract the data, organize it, basically do the basic analysis on it, it was probably 8 to 10 hours worth of work.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm thinking of what.
I work hard.
Well, no, and I'm going to guess you're efficient. I won't ask you if you're a micro or macro man. But Christy asked the question, what can we do to get this data in a usable format that we could provide it to students up front as we're counseling them and talking to them about potential career choices and the academic paths that they may endeavor upon. And so instead of $25,000 a year, I'm wondering if we don't have some internal expertise. And I was kind of curious what sort of time that took you to do that.
It wouldn't take very long to sit down with somebody and just point them to the location in the Bureau of Labor Statistics website where the data is located. And it's, and how, it's basically point and click to download. There are some other features though. So one option is you just download the whole data set. The other option is that you can also, they have some selective downloading, a feature, so you can just maybe pick out the occupations you want. But my guess is you'll probably just want the basic download dump, and it goes right into Excel. And from that point on, you can just begin analyzing it There's also, they do a very good job of including online documentation, so you know, you can kind of say, for example, they usually have a section called Frequently Asked Questions, and you can go to that section and you can read through it and you'll get a pretty good sense of what the data is, how it was collected, you know, what's the best way to think about how you should use it, this kind of thing.
And I have a follow-on question. Ron talked about the refinement, and I'm wondering if, because of the absolute numbers involved, that we just don't have enough to be statistically significant. If there's an issue of the sample size not being large enough in some of the rural areas or even some of the smaller metropolitan urban areas, why we can't refine that down, because a welder may actually do multiple tasks.
Yeah, and that's why they actually, so for the rural North Idaho definition, they include all of those counties, because it means that you're getting a large enough sample size that it's statistically viable.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you very much for not only the presentation, but the time and effort that you spent in focusing the information on NIC's
Yeah.
Great report.
offerings. So I want to thank you very much.
No, and again, feel free to distribute it. If for some reason something happens to it, you can contact me and I'll send you a copy.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're moving on to the next agenda item, which are the constituent reports, starting with Benaya Achievers. Asnick.
Well, good evening, Chairman Howard, the board, Mr. Lyons, Dr. Dunlap, my constituents, and esteemed guests. I'd like to just start off on a positive note with my report. Just as myself being student government this last school year as a senator last year, and having a month under our belt for this school year, I've seen noticeable involvement in student activities and student leadership. There's a few more students interested in student government opportunities, and we currently have a student at-large program where students can volunteer their time to serve on ASNIC committees and college committees. So I'd like to just mention that. I'd also like to begin by informing you all of two important commitments that ASNIC Student Government Board has decided this year. And the first commitment is to the college, to North Idaho College's values. So ASNIC hasn't been involved with a lot since school began 1 month ago. And first I would like to express to everyone ASNIC's commitment to the mission, vision, and values of North Idaho College. So this year's Student Government Board has collaborated to agree that any project or goal we set for the semester or the year shall adhere to one or more of the college's values of student success, educational excellence, community engagement, stewardship, and diversity. So our senators have already taken this initiative and applied it to their current projects. This year, these projects are formally being recorded as each senator writes a resolution to be reviewed by the rest of the Student Government Board that is voted on during our board meetings. We have 3 project resolutions passed as of yesterday at our board meeting. The second commitment that I'd like to highlight is our commitment to the student body. As students who are elected representatives of the entire student body here at NIC, we understand how important it is to lead by example. I would like to take this opportunity to express this year's Student Government Board's commitment to academic success. We strongly believe that as a student first, it is our responsibility to always put a 100% effort to our coursework. As the ASNIC president, I would like to convey a few other main focal points as well. So not only are we committed to academic success, but we are also committed to bettering student communication among students and the departments here on the NIC campus, as well as increasing student participation in the student services and activities that we provide as a college. With all that being said, I have several different things that I would like to highlight to you that ASNIC has been discussing and working on. This year's ASNIC board would like to continue working toward the funding and construction of a student recreational center here in the near future, as well as developing a student intercultural, or rather multicultural center here within the Student Union building. We, as a Student Government Board, had the privilege of meeting with Mr. Larry Briggs, the new Dean of General Studies, yesterday morning at our executive session. It was a pleasure to meet him and get acquainted. I believe he is here today. So It's good to see you again, Mr. Briggs. We have also invited Mr. Thomas Scott, the new Director of E-Learning, to our next executive session this next Tuesday, October 1st. And Mr. Scott has accepted our invitation, so we will be meeting with him this next Tuesday. ASNIC currently has student government representatives serving on college standing committees. And as committees' dates and times are continuing to be established by our constituents through the committee structure review process, we will be assigning board members to serve on those committees. Right now, we are in the final stages of drafting 2 committee charges to submit to our constituent groups for review. The first is the charge for a sustainability committee, and the second is a charge for a student union advisory board. I've worked on those personally and hope to have those finalized as soon as possible. And just today, I'd like to highlight something to you. We had a successful grand reopening of the coffee shop here in the main level of the student union building. One of our senators took on that as a startup project. His name is Senator James Durham. This event had we had a free raffle where students could enter in to earn prizes. We had free samples and tastes of smoothies and coffee from Craven's Coffee, which is our coffee provider for dining services. And we also received the opportunity, or students received the opportunity to vote on a new name for the coffee shop. So we'll have those results soon, and the coffee shop will be renamed soon. And right now, I'm taking an initiative to draft an email to contact all the student body presidents of colleges here in the state of Idaho. And the purpose of this email is to connect with them, establish a rapport, and suggest 2 ideas that I have. The first is to establish a formal agreement, such as a charter, to create an Idaho College Student Government Association where student governments can collaborate and share initiatives and ideas. So this would be for the purpose of communicating with the other college student governments. And then the second is to seek feedback for the idea of hosting a student leadership conference here at NIC for student leaders, where they can come and engage in leadership training activities and workshops. That concludes my report. Thank you. Do I have any questions?
Any questions, Todd?
I got a couple. Well, first off, great job. I love the initiatives and all the things that you guys are working on. Benaya, impressive. 2 things. One is you had one of your elected officials that decided to not serve this semester, focusing on academics. How's that gone with the replacement? And briefly share with us the process of coming up with the replacement.
Last year, we also had a few senators decide to drop over the summer so they could focus on school or for personal reasons. And the process we decided to take on, constitutionally, it is a presidential appointment. So I could appoint whichever student qualified that applied. We chose an interview process, and we had, I think, 5 candidates. So the executive members of the ASNIC board, myself, our Vice President Joshua Brands, and that was before we elected a Senate Pro Tempore, which is our Senator Bob Mertens. He wasn't involved in the process because he wasn't appointed as the Pro Tempore at the time.
Sure.
But Joshua Brands and myself interviewed all 5 candidates, and we came with a recommendation to the rest of our board and made the final decision. So that was the hiring interview process that we chose. Our new senator is Jordan Doler. She's a 2nd-year student here at NIC. She was a student athlete last year, member of the women's soccer team, and she has a lot of ambition, and she's a great addition to our board. She's a very hard worker, very diligent, and I think that answers your question.
It does. And if I may, I've got one more. You're talking about student participation.
Yeah.
I happened to meet a young man that's running a new club that was just chartered, Republican group that they've just put together. He's been very active in the community, and saw him even at a meeting last night, so exciting. How many new clubs have you chartered this year? Has there been a lot of growth, or was that kind of just a onesie?
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. We have had at least 2 new clubs. We've had 3 new clubs.
Okay. I was just curious.
Just within the first month, we've had 3 new clubs. Do we have a club total? roughly 30 active clubs right now. So I think from about 16 last year, that's a substantial improvement. So
It speaks to what you were saying, you bet.
Any other questions for Benaiah? Benaiah, before you sit down, let me ask you, last year, this board approved a resolution with regard to the Student Rec Center request. And thereafter, we had a workshop on financing that I think gave everybody a little bit of insight into the realities of doing that. And I guess my question is, if you're pursuing that, is it going to be the same proposal as before? Or should the board take a look at pulling back its resolution, give you an opportunity to come forward with a new resolution when you're ready? Because right now, quite frankly, I think we've left this is, we approved the last plan that you had to be sent on to the building, the Student Housing Commission, and that's not going to happen, I suspect. Or if it is, can you explain that to me? Is it going to be a new proposal? Is it going to be the same?
to my knowledge, we need to collaborate to get that new proposal. And as a student that is trying to understand the shared governance process here at NIC, I think it's in all of our best interest to take a step back, reevaluate where we're at, and maybe form a different resolution or a different proposal as to what you're speaking of. So we definitely need to look at it, analyze it further, and see what possibilities there are. I don't have a solid answer for you at this point.
If you're going to reevaluate and maybe replan your request, it probably would be of value, at least in keeping things in an orderly fashion, to have a motion to rescind our last, passing the motion that you brought to us. And then the table's clean and you can come forward with a new motion when you're ready.
Okay.
So maybe next month we can kind of clean that up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that insight.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Benaiah. Yes. We have staff assembly. Nancy.
Thank you, Chairman Howard, Board of Trustees, and President Dunlap. I think I'm starting to lose my voice a bit, so please bear with me. At our September staff assembly meeting, we invited Pat Whitcomb, NIC wrestling coach, to talk about their community service program, which consists of the Shirley Parker Reading Program, the We Care Program for breast cancer prevention, and the free school supplies for school-aged children. We were interested to learn about the programs and wanted to let Pat know that we were interested in supporting them any way we could with their programs in the future. Also at our meeting, we had Erin Norvell of the HR office introduce the new employee learning management system called Green Light. This is an internet-based system designed to help centralize management and tracking of training that takes place for our employees here at NIC. The remainder of our meeting focused on updates for the staff on policies or guidelines such as the vehicle guideline, the new wellness program, and an update on the Sterling Silver program. I also updated the Assembly on the status of the reduction in force policy, which Audrey will speak of in her Senate report. Thank you. Questions?
Yes, any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Audrey? Oh, Michelle.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, trustees, and Dr. Dunlap. I would like to report on the September 12th meeting of the Faculty Assembly. We had excellent attendance at this meeting. I would like to think that it was due to my sterling leadership abilities, but it was more likely due to the fact that the agenda items were RIF and tenure. The Assembly received and discussed the reduction in force policy that was given to staff and faculty leadership in August of this year. The Assembly voted to reject the policy. This policy was an exact duplicate of one presented to an ad hoc Senate committee in March of 2011. In May of that year, it was subsequently rejected by the committee, as well as staff and faculty leadership. That proposed policy was then withdrawn by Dr. Bell. The Assembly is very supportive of Dr. Dunlap's plan to create a separate policy for the reduction or elimination of specific programs. Separating this from a policy dealing with financial exigency seems logical and in the best interest of the college and the college community. There continues to be a great deal of concern about the proposed 10-year workshop. The Assembly has a number of questions. What will be the process for this workshop? Will faculty be active participants or observers? What is the intent of holding such a workshop? Given that all tenure policies, including the tenure policy itself, as well as policies on remediation of tenured faculty, suspension of tenured faculty, and termination of tenured faculty, were reviewed, revised, approved by the Senate and this board in 2010, we are curious as to why this is under review again. With these questions and concerns in mind, the Assembly passed a resolution to invite the board to our October 10th meeting with the hopes of having these questions addressed. If the board or representatives from the board decide to attend our meeting, the executive committee would be happy to meet with you and discuss the process. That's my report. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
If I could just
Sure.
make a statement. Michelle, we certainly appreciate the respectful process and that we're trying to work through this together. And I think it's wonderful that you're reaching out to the board and that we can communicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
Michelle, let me follow up on your invitation to the board to attend a faculty meeting on October 10th. I'm sure that we can find some way to do that. I think the more we can talk, the better we can get to understand one another's positions and arrive at a mutually agreeable solution. The problem gets to be if we have more than 3 trustees in a meeting, then we have to give it public notice, and if you want your faculty meeting to be publicly noticed, then we can invite all of the trustees to be there. Or if you would be comfortable with a discussion with no more than 2 trustees, then we can find 2 representatives from the trustee panel to try and meet with you on that at that time or some other appropriate time. So what's your pleasure?
My pleasure?
Well, yeah, since you're the spokesperson for your, yeah.
I'd be happy. I realize the problem, that if 3 or more of you came, we would have to make this a public session, and that would complicate that rather substantially. I would be happy to talk with you, Chairman Howard, and perhaps we could work out some sort of compromise that wouldn't require the entire, what am I trying to say? It's been a long day. I think we could work out some sort of compromise, but I would like you to know that the Assembly was quite adamant about inviting the entire board. So I would like to make that very clear, but obviously a compromise could be arranged.
All right, well, you might check with your constituents and find out if they would want to have 2 of us, or if they want all of us there, then we would formulate a workshop to talk about it, and it would be publicized.
Yes, okay. I will let everyone know that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. Now we have Audrey.
You got up here a little too quick.
Yes.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, members of the board, and President Dunlap. Given the fact that College Senate had our first meeting of the year after the August Board of Trustees meeting and conducted our September meeting last week, I will be providing you 2 reports tonight, but don't be concerned, I promise to be brief. At our August meeting, the first reading was approved for the Safety Advisory Committee and the NIC Children's Center Advisory Committee. We held officer elections, and Chantel Black was elected as Vice Chair of College Senate. Matt Sebi was elected as parliamentarian. and Karen Rupel was elected as corresponding secretary. The reduction in force policy was discussed, and Senate decided to table the policy so that the assemblies would have the opportunity to review, discuss, and provide us their feedback. At our September meeting, ASNIC shared 2 resolutions. The first resolution, number 274, requests that the Student Union Advisory Board be considered as a standing committee. The second resolution, number 275, requests that a Campus Sustainability Committee be considered as a standing committee. Senate anticipates receiving the specific charge and membership criteria of these committees so that we may move forward. Next, a second reading was approved for the Safety Advisory Committee and NIC Children's Center Advisory Committee, thus making these 2 new standing committees. The reduction in force policy was untabled and discussed. It was decided that since the policy had been formally presented to Senate and was tabled at our last meeting, that we should untable it and reject it in order to comply with NIC Policy 2.0104, Initiation of Policies. In the accompanying procedures, it stipulates the Senate is required to provide comments on proposed policies within 60 calendar days, and that in the event that no comments or revisions have been received, there shall be a presumption that both parties are in agreement with the proposal. It was also mentioned during discussion that the reduction in force policy that was approved by all constituent groups and leadership in November 2012 continues to be a prime example of campus collaboration and shared governance at its best. And due to the fact that we ran out of time during this last meeting, we will hold a special meeting tomorrow where we will conduct a first reading of the credit hour policy and procedure. And that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Any questions? None? Thank you very much.
Right, I got it easy.
Our next agenda item is the President's report, and I'm going to use a chair's prerogative, if I might, and we have as one of the agenda items, information items for enrollment update and instructional response to fall enrollment, and ask that the President include those items in his report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, trustees, and colleagues. Tonight, we have 3 vice presidents that will report out because as the school year started, as predicted, we had a drop in enrollment. And so I'm going to ask Graydon Stanley to do an enrollment report and then also do a special report related to some very good news in financial aid. I will ask Lita Burns to discuss the impact of the drop in enrollment on instruction. And then lastly, Ron Dorn will discuss the budget adjustment to accommodate that drop in enrollment. And we've gone through a process where we've identified where we can reduce our budgets to meet the new budget requirement with that drop in enrollment. Before I ask Graydon to come up, I would like to mention that last week we had the dedication of the Powder Magazine on campus. We dedicated Chiemquit Park with the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and we also had the dedication of the Veterans Memorial on campus. It was a very eventful evening. It was very, very good. There was a lot of history and many participants that included Quanah from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, Robert Singletary from the museum, as well as many of our NIC employees. And in particular, I would like to commend Mike Halpern, Gary Stark, and Rhonda Smalley for their effort in restoring the Powder Magazine, which arguably is the oldest brick building in North Idaho and was a significant part of Fort Sherman. And so I'll just leave it at that. But it was a very, very good event, and the folks that participated did a fabulous job. We also had Jazz Northwest play during dinner, and we had some folks who decided to dance and had a great time. So it was a very good way to kick off our 80th anniversary celebration, and we will, throughout the year, be conducting a number of events to reflect on our 80th anniversary and history. So with that, I'm going to call up Graydon Stanley, and then followed by Lita, and then Ron, and then I will conclude with an update on the sports complex. Graydon.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, President Dunlap, and other guests here tonight, I'd like to share with you, first of all, enrollment information for the fall of 2013. A couple important notes is the comparisons as we compare this fall semester to last. Last year's date that I'm comparing to is the October 15th reporting date that's required by the state for all institutions. So that date's actually a little later than what I'm reporting this year. October 15th, we'll snap comparisons again, and I'll be able to give you a full enrollment report by program with, I believe, all the information that you'd like real extensively. So tonight is mostly just totals that we thought you'd be interested in. So as of today, I'd like to tell you that our total enrolled head count numbers, and then I'll give you percentages. Total enrolled head count is 6,053. That's an 8% decrease from last fall, October 15th. Our total FTE as of today is 4,097. That's an 11% decrease from last fall. If we separate out the divisions, if you look at academic head count, it's 4,479. That's almost a 12% decrease from last fall. If you look at academic FTE, it is 3,040. That's approximately a 16% decrease from last fall. Dual credit, the head count is 688. That's approximately a 2% increase in head count. Dual credit FTE is 321. That's approximately a 2% decrease in FTE. And finally, professional technical, the head count is 885. That's approximately an 8% increase over last fall. And finally, professional technical FTE is 735, and that's approximately an 8% increase over last fall. So notable changes here would certainly be the decrease in the academic headcount and FTE, the continued increase in professional technical, both headcount and FTE, and notable is the fact that dual credit is approximately the same. The change there was within 2% either way. So those are the general statistics comparing this fall to last fall, October 15th, and the board meeting that follows. I'll provide an extensive enrollment report by programs, by gender, by county, by any kind of information that you'd like. We'd be glad to provide with those specifics. Before I go to the other information, is there questions that the board would like to ask in regard to enrollment?
Any questions, Ron?
Graydon, last year we saw some reports on, we see this increase of 8% in the PTE side. We saw last year that there was some, I can't remember the number, it was 500 to 800 students were not served because their class were full. Do we have that number as well, that unserved because we didn't have the facilities?
You know, I don't have it with me tonight, Trustee Nielsen. I'll make sure I have that for the October meeting. I can tell you this time, because we were coming right down to the wire, that we had very few students on waiting lists for any of the professional technical education programs. That was unusual to us as well, that we were enrolling almost everybody who had applied and was eligible to enter, so we didn't maintain very long waiting lists at all. But I'll bring that for the October report.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to now share this information with you, and it's much better news, followed by the good news here. Some of you might recall that I reported that we had formed a student debt task force at the request of President Dunlap. Lita and I co-chaired that meeting, but it was primarily served by the good folks in both the financial aid and the business office. Part of what they did is develop a number of strategies here to address the bad debt that students were incurring and the amount of debt that students were putting themselves in. You might recall that I said that the policies and the practices that we created were really quite aggressive and unlike any that were being practiced, thank you, Ron, being practiced by any in the state. Since that time, and because of our success that you're about to hear, there are other institutions that will be following our practices. I am very proud of the work they've done and want to share with you really some amazing statistics. And I'll read through this slowly so you can grasp the magnitude of it. The average debt load for students in 2010 was approximately $6,500. The average debt load for students in 2011 was approximately $5,900. The average debt load of students in 2012 was a bit over $6,000. The average debt load for students in 2013 is $2,700. That's a 55% decrease from 2012 to 2013 in the average student debt load, and we believe most of that is attributable to the changes in our policies in financial aid. I want to share with you a second part of that, and one of the policies that we changed was most institutions were awarding everything that students were eligible for up front. That might be Pell Grant, that might be work study, that would be subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Students didn't have to make the request for all of those. Institutions would award that if they were eligible. We went to a process, you might recall, with unsubsidized loans where students would have to go through a number of other steps. First of all, we wouldn't award those on the front side. Secondly, if they chose to, they'd have to go through financial literacy training. They'd have to put together a budget and provide some sense, at least to themselves, that they genuinely needed that money. As a result of those efforts, I'd like to share this information with you. Unsubsidized loan awarding in 2010, there were 2,638 students who were awarded. In 2011, there were 2,945 students awarded. In 2012, there were 2,693 students awarded. In 2013, there is 669. We've decreased the unsubsidized awards by 76% from last year to this year. And again, I think that directly is as a result of some of the efforts we put forward. And we think that you'll really see in the next 2 or 3 years that the default rate go down dramatically. Certainly the amount of debt that students are incurring is going down dramatically. So I'm so pleased about those efforts. And while we've had a few complaints from students, it's been very few. It's been exceptional. And for the most part, these changes have rolled out smoothly and have had minimal negative impact on students. So I'm very proud of the work we've done to that end.
Any questions?
One quick one. With the additional accountability that you've provided for the subsidized loans, do we have an idea what sort of percentage drop we've had and what's being dispersed there or taken?
On the
significant for the unsubsidized. These are Stafford loans, correct? Generally.
Correct. On the subsidized, I'll get a figure for you. I suspect that has dropped as well, but not as dramatically because they don't have to go through those additional steps to ask for that one. The subsidized is awarded on the front side and divided out into 2 installments.
Yeah. Any other questions? Grayton, you've thrown a lot of numbers at us. And if I was just looking at the numbers in a broad fashion, I might ask the question like, is the revision in our decreasing the debt load and the number of students taking up some unsubsidized loans, is that impacting our enrollment?
And I can't tell you exactly. We suspect that is, but only minimally. If you're trying to compare the benefit of decreasing student debt and the benefit of decreasing the the default rate. That compared to the decrease in enrollment, our belief at this time, Chairman Howard, is that it's well worth the investment we've made on the front side. Our enrollment decreases mirror what's happening at all the other institutions who didn't change their policies. So we think very little could be attributed to that change.
Thank you. Any other questions? Who's next? Lita?
Chairman Howard, members of the board. Just in response to our drop in enrollment, as I reported last month, we in instruction did make a number of changes to accommodate the decrease in enrollment. We canceled 86 sections of course sections in order to match what the enrollment was going to be as closely as we possibly could. In addition, to make sure that we were providing the right courses for the students who were enrolling, we added 24 sections to meet needs. What we saw was many of our upper division courses were not enrolling as they typically do, and our 100 level courses we were needing more of, and so accommodated in that fashion. The other thing we did was to merge sections, so we looked very carefully at low enrolled courses that had multiple sections and try to combine as many sections as possible in order to decrease the cost to the institution. And overall, we were able to add 189 seats to existing sections by expanding those sections beyond their normal capacity. So again, that was the manner in which we responded to the change in enrollment. Now, most of that work, as I said, was done before the start of the first day of classes, so that students their class schedules would not change dramatically once they started school. At this point, instruction is looking very carefully at the spring semester and trying to be proactive about what our response will be, and trying to predict, of course, the trend that might occur in the spring semester. We are expecting maybe an additional drop in enrollment, a few percentages, we hope, only, for spring semester, and so we will accommodate that drop in a similar fashion, trying to be proactive so the students know what choices they have in terms of classes, and ensuring that they have the classes that they need to graduate, the classes that they need to move on and transfer, and of course the classes that they need to finish the programs that they're currently enrolled in. And just another comment that I would like to make in response to the information provided about the changes to our financial aid package. With all things, anytime you institute a new system and new rules, there is going to be some fallout. As Graydon mentioned, we did have a few students come to us saying, letting us know the impact that this change had on them. And although the impact appeared to be small in comparison to the number of students that we serve, we are interested in making sure that we serve all students. So we listened very carefully to what their complaints were, and we are taking a look at our curriculum structure and seeing if there's a way that we can manage our curriculum structure and our course fees in order to assist the students to better be able to pay for the courses and their course fees within the new financial aid model that we have established. So certainly are listening to those comments and quite frankly criticisms of our new structure, and we are going to respond to those as well.
Any questions, Lita? Judy?
I think I heard you say it, but I just want to be sure we heard that. It was always the dilemma when you reduce classes then, have you cut off somebody from completing something they needed the class to do? And what I think I heard you say was that you evaluated that and in fact were able to be sure that the second year programs are still there in some fashion so folks can complete whatever programs they were in. Is there any programs that were changed dramatically as you went through this process?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Myers, no, we were very careful to make sure that students would be able to complete the programs that they are processing through. In fact, if anyone were to scroll through our course enrollments that we have online, you would probably be able to find some very low enrolled courses. And the reason for that is we had to make sure that students, as they were progressing through their areas of study, that they were able to complete what they needed to complete to graduate. We have established a minimum enrollment rate for the majority of our courses, but certainly take a look at each course individually as we make those decisions so that we decrease or eliminate the impact to students.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One question, Mr. Chair.
Trustee?
Lita and Dr. Dunlap, before the spring semester, and if you get a kind of an idea that you're going to have to cut a program, probably in the professional technical area, can we get quite a bit of head time on that so we can talk about that? It'll come down to a budget issue, I'm sure.
Chairman Howard and Trustee Wood, the process of, at this point, we do have a policy that guides us in elimination of programs, and we actually are going to be looking at that very carefully just as we are entering this more difficult time from a budgetary perspective in the future. And we would never eliminate a program likely in the middle of a semester. This would be something we would look at through program review. We would carefully weigh out what all of our opportunities are to save the program, if you will, to make sure that it's viable. And if it's not viable, we would give enough advance notice. The state board actually also has a policy guiding us on discontinuation of programs, and we would have to abide by that policy as well. And that policy requires a teach out of any program so that no students would ever be caught in the middle of a program and not be allowed to finish. So yeah, that would be some very difficult decisions to make when we get to that point. And I think at sometime it will be not if we get to that point, but when we get to that point. But we will definitely have a very methodical process in place to make those decisions.
Well, the program I'm thinking of really wouldn't fall into one of those categories where you would worry about a student not completing, since it's an academy. And so they've already completed, and then you have to start a new academy. So that's just a discussion I think we should gear up to have. Thank you.
Ron?
Let me comment first before we get into the figures on what Braden had talked about. And financially, where you're going to see that impact is at the end of the year in what we have to write off as a bad debt expense. We've been averaging about $1 million a year in write-offs for bad debts. You will know in the middle of January to some extent what that impact's going to be, but I see a fairly significant reduction in that figure, which obviously will have a positive impact on our bottom line. So I'm really happy with these changes that have been made and where they're taking the institution, because I think before, when you look at this, we budget revenues. We had a lot of revenues there, and then we'd have the write-offs come later, and we've already budgeted the revenues, and tough to change in mid-course. I think this is a really positive step in aligning our revenues with our budgets, with our expenditure budgets. So I'm really happy to see this thing. And again, you should get a report, I think, in January, mid-January, some idea what this is going to reduce our bad debt expense for the year. So I just want to start out with that. Now, when we looked at these budget reductions or holdbacks, when we built the budget for 14, we had taken into account in the change, the way we get revenue going per credit hour charge, we had taken into account a fair amount of this reduction. So instead of looking at it from a credit hour, from a financial standpoint, we looked at it from a revenue standpoint. So when we went back and checked this and came back to PC, right now with the figures that you've heard tonight, we're looking at a potential reduction in expenditures or need to reduce by about $800,000 to get us through the year. And that includes a 3% estimated decrease in attrition from fall to spring semester in students. So the figure that the PC was looking at to reduce was $800,000. That was the target figure that they had. And of course, they have gone through that, and they have looked at that. We met on that on Tuesday. And the figures that you get, what we looked at is some of the reductions ultimately could be permanent. Many of them are probably one time, and I'll explain a little more as I go through the list, that we have to look at really hard in adding back in fiscal year 15. And let me give you a prime example. I'm surprised y'all didn't ask for the figure. The reduction in courses taught has allowed adjunct salaries to be reduced, estimated reduction of approximately $260,000 for the year. Now that, depending on where we go in fiscal year 15, could stay at that reduced level, or if we got lucky and enrollment went up, some of that money would have to come back in. But right now, in the pre-planning process for 15, I'm suggesting to the institution that we look at another 3 to 5% in reduction in enrollment for fiscal year 15. So that's an aside for 15's planning when the institution gets started on that. So the reductions came in many areas. I just mentioned one. Adjunct salaries are reduced by about $260,000. We have some matching funds for federal and state work study that we have to budget for, but we're fortunate the last few years that we haven't had to use that money in the matches that's been waived for us. So that's another amount of money, in this case about $75,000, that we can use to reduce our budget expenditures for this year, but they're gonna have to go back and look at going back in 15 because we have to assume that we're not gonna get our match requirement waived on these work study funds every year. We have, by charging for one of our benefit, our HRA benefit account, we have accumulated a surplus of approximately $150,000. That's one time. We take that out this year. We have it in reserve. We take it out. We won't have that available to us next year, but we can use it this year to reduce. And then all the areas are really, really good about coming back in their budget reductions. And out of student services, we've got about $200,000, and much of that is in salary savings. And again, that's delaying the filling of positions, maybe not filling the positions for years, filling them at a lower salary that was budgeted. So again, we're able to get that in 14, but a certain amount of that will probably wind up going back in fiscal year 15, or having to be looked at to go back in. We also have utility savings of about $150,000, and across the board, M&O of approximately $74,000. There are other things we looked at, not to look at raising the reduction amount, but to allow our president and the PC the options to do some reallocations in the second half of this year. So we're not done with where we budgeted and where we're ultimately put money, but we have at least accounted for what we think we need to reduce our expenditures by to meet our revenue total. But we also are looking at other items in there that maybe we can reallocate the things that our president and you all will look at for the second half of this year.
Any questions? Ron?
First of all, Ron, as we review this bad debt, and you look at the amount of student fees, those student loans that were given out, how did it get up to be close to $1 million of write-offs every year and not draw the attention that we had some policing taking place? And what do we have assurance? Sounds from Graydon's presentation that now they've got a system in place, but how did it get to that? And then how do we assure that we don't slip back when we are able to achieve this kind of a record?
Well, unless we change the policy, and really it deals in part, and Graydon might explain with the drop ad, how we deal with the drop ad policy and how we deal with the drop for non-attendance were two of the changes that were in what Graydon was talking about. And unless we go back as an institution and change those somehow, we should be able to maintain whatever that reduction is in bad debt expense from what it was. I can't answer because, our president wasn't here, but some other people here have probably heard me gripe about this for the last 3 years, that it was much higher than we thought it ought to be, the bad debt expense. And how would we control that? And a large portion of that, which is what you'll get in January, which they've done, is not allocating the money all at once to the students, allocating it, twice, right? Twice. And what that allows us to do within the drop for non-payment and the drop for non-attendance, We know it's going to lower the amount, which we call, I think you've heard me use the term, return to Title IV. If we disperse that money and then the student drops out of school after the 100% refund date, we have to pay that money back to the federal government. This policy they have in place now pretty much assures, in many cases, that we're not awarding return to Title IV money to students who aren't going to be at this institution when it comes time to refund that money. And Ron, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's,
Yeah, it just is when you see something get away from you and then you get your arms around it, you make sure there's a policy and a procedure in place that keeps that from getting away from you. Follow-up comment and question, Ron, is you talk about this $150,000 rainy day fund that you could tap into. What I hear are this surplus money you have so that you have sitting aside. What I'm hearing from Lita is that we got some other rain coming. So for us to tap in one time to not go through the pain of making the financial adjustments we need to balance this budget, and we blow that $150,000, this one-time surplus of money we have, what do we do after that if things continue to deteriorate from a head count?
we're going through the process. There's more money that's been at least initially identified that could come out of this budget that could cover that. I think, Ron, that's a tough decision that this institution ultimately would have to make, but we could go further into this if we had to and cover that kind of an issue. Again, I think the bigger problem is in 15 for us as an institution, when we go to look at what can we keep out permanently out of this, and some of this we can, and what needs to be added back, and what are our sources of revenues going to be for fiscal year 15 if we assume another enrollment decrease. I think that's where we're going to catch more. For this year, we're fine. Even if we have more than 3%, we're going to be fine as an institution. We're going to cover it. They've heard me say this too many times. The problem's going to come in fiscal year 15 when we try to match up the revenues with the expenditures. With the cuts that we've made this year, where some of that's going to have to be added back. I think that, if it happens, that's where it's going to become a little more problematic.
But you would suggest we start the process now and not wait till it's facing us in the face?
We have, as an institution, started that. There's more that they have identified, that we have identified that we could use. Yes, I agree. We don't want to wait.
Todd?
Ron, I want to do a clarification, especially for somebody that's in the audience watching this on the tape here. When you're talking about the Title IV money coming back and the money that's being given out, I just want to clarify, make sure I understand it and see if the people at home will understand it. What we're talking about at that point is the disbursement of the grants, right? The CIOG, the Pell, that sort of thing. We're not actually talking about the disbursement of the Stafford loans, because whether they're subsidized or unsubsidized, those are the responsibility of the student.
That's
But when we
correct, the
give out the
grants.
grants and then they are disenrolled or whatever that process is, then we're on the hook to the federal government for those funds that we've dispersed.
We are on the hook for those funds. That's
Because
what that.
they're technically not eligible for them, as it turns out.
Right. And
Okay.
it's very seldom, even though we go through the process of trying to collect it back, do we ever get it back.
Okay,
So
and then there's
this
my
is,
follow-on
again-
question. Is there a reason we don't attempt to get it back? I mean, it seems to me you could enlist a service to do that
We
potentially.
do that.
What's our recovery rate? Poor?
Okay, about the size of the eye in a needle, seriously. And if you don't get it back within the first 12 months, you're unlikely to get it back at all. So when we have that, we put that out to collection at the end of the calendar year. And if we don't collect it in the 12 months, which we usually don't, then we totally write it off.
Follow-on question, if I may. Just out of curiosity, is that a stated policy, or is that just a choice we've made? Because in theory, that's an indebtedness, and it's by contract. They have to sign. They have to sign their award letters. They have to sign. I mean, I know what my son signs at college, and the hook that we're on for him. Are those people, in theory, you could follow them for a long time, I would think, if you
You could
chose to.
follow them for a long time. They might stay in collection, but we write them off internally because after 12 months, my likelihood of collecting that is negligible. So I'd rather have that written off. And then if it comes back, it'll come in as a miscellaneous revenue item for us if we get money back on that.
Mr. Howard?
Yes. Ron?
Oh. Do we have a system in place that protects it, that 2 years from now, that student chooses to re-engage again and decides he wants to go through the cycle one more time? Do we have a system in place to make sure that you don't come back?
Mr. Chairman and Trustee Nielsen, if I may, that's what I had wanted to address. Besides the fact that we're trying to collect that money, we put a hold on all their records here. And so they're unable to enroll here without satisfying that debt. And in fact, are unable to enroll at other institutions as well. As it requires them to get clearance from previous institutions, they can't get transcripts, they can't get clearance for additional financial aid. So all those protections are in place.
Any other questions? Just one comment. I suspect since we're in this, normally we get a mid-year report on the budget, and we're still on track to do that in January or?
January is usually when you get that, at the end of the second quarter, yes.
Okay. And I guess my second comment is, I know we've talked about this for as long as I've been on this board, which is not all that long, but that we knew that there was we were going to see reduction in enrollments, and I'm pleased to see that the administration is being proactive in terms of not just dealing with the present problem, but looking down the road in terms of planning for further reductions. And I guess I'm kind of looking forward to your estimates of how you're going to deal with the further reductions, because we made what was it, an estimate of 3% reduction this year?
5.
It was
Is it
5%.
And we're still in a problem. So as you make your estimates for the future, I'd be interested to see what your projections are in terms of reductions in enrollment.
You bet. And we will watch the national trends and the regional trends with a great deal of scrutiny that will help us in forecasting that. But as mentioned in response to Mr. Nielsen's questions, we have already started the process for 2015 so that we will be well prepared regardless of what happens with enrollment.
Judy, did you have a question?
Just thinking about that, how are we doing compared to other institutions? Are we the only ones to have this kind of a shrinkage?
Well, the national trends are a downward trend virtually everywhere, with the exception of the College of Western Idaho. They continue to grow just because of their location and the value that they bring to those communities that they serve. CSI has had a reduction. All the schools in Washington State have had a reduction to the tune of about 6% in FTE. And as Graydon mentioned, our FTE was down 8%, I believe, is what he said. And so we're fairly consistent. And I think it's mostly attributed to the economy slowly starting to tick back up and people going back to work and businesses hiring and expanding a little bit. And when that happens, enrollment at educational institutions declines.
Thank you. Any other questions? Did you have anything further in your report on the president, under the president's report?
I have one comment. In my senior moment that I had just a little bit ago, I failed to mention that Bill McEver, who is our plant manager, facilities manager, had a major role in the restoration of the powder magazine, and I want to recognize Bill and his efforts as well. And that would conclude our reports, but I do have an action item related to the sports complex.
Right, and so let's just move on to the next agenda item under old business, which is the sports complex.
At the last board meeting, the ad hoc committee that was appointed, that was directed by the trustees to be established to examine the possibilities for the sports complex and activity center, provided their recommendations. And consistent with that, no decision has been made to move forward with that particular project. The committee analyzed the data that was available from a 2008 survey, and I believe there's recognition that that information needs to be updated to better facilitate the trustees in the future to make a decision whether or not to move forward with that particular project. And so, in light of that, whereas in March 2013, the North Idaho College Board of Trustees approved a resolution supporting exploration of the construction of a multi-purpose athletic facility and activity facility, and directed NIC administration to create an ad hoc committee to investigate possibilities as well as stipulations regarding the prudent use of fiscal resources in development of the project. And whereas the ad hoc committee recommended in part on August 28th that any further investigation, data collection, pre-design, or analysis be conducted by a consultant with expertise in the development, operation, design, construction, and/or management of these type of facilities. And whereas there is a need to update the original 2008 survey or study in terms of capital and operational budget, revenue generation opportunities, size and capacity of facility, and ongoing operation of the sports complex. And whereas a donor to the North Idaho College Foundation has agreed to underwrite the full cost of an updated study, which would be at no cost to North Idaho College. It will not impact the college fiscally, and I want to emphasize that no decision has been made by the trustees to move forward with the project, but there is a need to collect additional data so that an informed and updated decision can be made. It is therefore recommended that the North Idaho College Board of Trustees direct the North Idaho College administration, working with the foundation, to retain a consulting company with appropriate experience and expertise to complete an updated study that meets the following scope of work. First of all, this will need to be on the fast track, and the company will present a formal report to North Idaho College no later than October 30th, 2013. And the report shall include, but not be limited to, a narrative defining the facility program outlining North Idaho College's vision for the sports complex, including the location, the size, the number of seats, suites, concessions, parking, operational needs, and potential tenants. It will also include a conceptual capital construction budget. It will include an operational budget, including all costs related to project development and related infrastructure. It will have a comprehensive and detailed project schedule, and it will include financing options for the project, including identification of sources of income to help offset costs and debt if that may be the case associated with the project. And that the provisions of any agreement with a consulting organization will be construed according to the laws of the state of Idaho. And so, Mr. Chair, I would ask that the board approve us moving forward with this study to provide you more timely information. And again, I want to emphasize two key points, and that is that there is no fiscal impact to North Idaho College, and there has been no decision made to move forward on the project. It is just to gather more data so that you will have the ability to make a more informed decision.
Is there a motion or with regard to the request for the
Mr. Chair?
motion? Yes.
Yeah, well, I am, first of all, your report was very thorough, and the fact that we have a donor to the foundation that would be so generous to the college and look at our long-term needs. I mean, that's just incredible, and so we appreciate it very much. I would make a motion that we move forward with this generous offer.
Is there a second?
Myers
There
seconded.
seconds. Any discussion? Yes.
Confirming again, what I just seconded was a motion to get more information, because this is an
Correct.
educational institution, so we're becoming educated. So moving forward doesn't mean we made a decision, it means we're getting more information.
That's correct.
And
Ron?
I want to third this comment, is, that this resolution that was drafted back in March was an exploratory thing at just to take a look at it at 30,000 feet, and now we're down to about 20,000 feet, and this generous donor is willing to absorb the cost to get this down to 5,000 feet so we can look at it, so we can even see what we're talking about. So with that, I support Trustee Myers and Trustee Wood on saying at no cost, no commitment, I would support that as well, so.
Any other comments? As you went through your, and you have a draft motion here that contains the provisions that you just verbally gave to us. I think I would like to see us at least think about adding another provision that the study must consider and stay within the provisions of the board's prior resolution with regard to this matter. There are 6 conditions that we have resolutely tried to stay within as we proceed with this investigation. And so make sure that this next step is one that still stays within those provisions.
Will do, and I will include that as a provision of the scope of work.
And if that's okay to amend your motion, and,
Second's happy with that.
Yeah, I would make that amendment. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
all right, any further discussion on the motion?
Just the report comes back on October 30th, and that means it would come back to us at our board meeting, because our board meeting is being delayed from the usual Wednesday, 4th, whatever it is, till, so at the next board meeting, this report will come to us.
Yes.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report and a request to move forward with the study.
Since we have no new business, and we've already covered the informational items, we can move on to the chair's report, and it's really quite short, actually. I want to remind everyone that our next meeting has been moved, regular board meeting has been moved to October 30th. And there's also a scheduled workshop on the career technical facility set for October 29th that the board will get involved in discussing the the next steps to be taken in the career technical facility studies. Let me report that the entire board is going to an ACT annual conference or convention in Seattle. That's the Association of Community College Trustees. Several members of the board have been to these conferences in the past. They are extremely helpful in allowing us to talk to and interact with trustees from not only other states in the Northwest, but throughout the United States. There are a number of different seminar topics that we engage in that give us not only ideas about that might be helpful to NIC, but also leadership issues and other things associated with being an effective trustee. So I'm pleased to see the entire board is going, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity also to, because there are so many sessions, quite frankly, to go to, that we'll be able to share some of that information when we get back, because we'll probably each be attending different sessions. And then I would also like to report that 2 of the board members, Trustee Banducci and myself, attended a Chamber of Commerce legislative conference here. It was very helpful in terms of hearing some of the proposals that the Chamber had, and NIC through Mark Browning was able to make a presentation on behalf of NIC in conjunction with also representatives from the University of Idaho and Lewis Clark College. And it was just really helpful to see, I have a discussion on the importance of educational issues to the business community here in this area. And with that, that concludes my report, and I would open the agenda items for remarks for good of the order. Anyone have any remarks for the good of the order? Hearing none? Oh,
I just have one.
I waited too long.
I'll be fast. I'll be fast. I was just going to comment, Joey touched on about the dedications, and thought they were very well done. And myself, I'm particularly moved with the memorial for the veterans.
Thank you.
Reasons for that. But anyway, and the rain held off just long enough.
Thank you. Hearing no other comments, we are adjourned.